Hello, 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 and welcome to the Blue Oval Podcast. I am Ben Weissel, and joining me, as always, Garrett Zatlin. How's it going, man?
Ben, it is me, and it is on. We're recording this Tuesday, August 1st, and it is the first day in a long time where I've said to myself, I haven't actually told the team this, that we're not going to post anything today unless it's like a dire breaking news story. I said, you know what? We just came off of finishing our individual preseason cross country rankings for D1 and D2 and D3. Every team did a phenomenal job, by the way. And we're going to give ourselves a day to relax and to do this podcast. But Ben, more importantly, I went through all of my emails, cleared them out, folded them, all the files, cleared them out,
Wow.
folded them. I went to our Canva page and I cleared all of that, organized it. If this is what drugs feel like, then I'm going to keep doing this all the time. Like I totally understand it now. So it's been a good day.
Wow, there's a lot that I think I could say. I will not. But yeah, I'm glad that you were able to do it. Yeah, I mean, it feels like we've talked about this before, but it's just a whirlwind. The off season goes so fast. We're already in August. Like there are going to be races this month, which is just a little staggering to think about. Um,
Yeah.
we've gotten the individual rankings. We're working on the team rankings. News is still coming fast and furious, like
Yes.
coaching news. Which, again, there will be races this month. So, like these coaching moves need to happen and wrap up pretty darn soon.
Yeah, I was talking to one coach and he was like, "Yeah, and this kid like doesn't come into camp until then." I was like, "Oh my gosh, your preseason starts in like some of them 10 days, 2 weeks. Like
Yep.
it's crazy." So, it's here. Our team rankings are coming soon. If you're listening to this, it's probably going to be next week. So stay tuned for that. D1 and then D2, D3 will be later in the month. Rankings and reviews. I think we haven't really changed anything there over the past week or two. Please help us, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Go check it out there. But like you said, there's been a few things going on. We have a heck of an episode today. There's three major headlines that we're going to try to get to that I think we'll probably have a good amount of to speak on.
Yep.
Where did you want to start first?
Let's start with Sean Brosnan out at UCLA. I think the headline there is after only 1 year, he is. Was the terminology fired or was it let
The
go?
terminology that he used is that his contract was not renewed.
Renewed. Okay, so he had a 1 year deal, just did not get the second, like another contract, essentially. Um, a lot of speculation around this. We'll try to dive into that. But he's someone that went straight from the high school ranks. Obviously, one of the best high school programs that he built at Newbury Park, and then came to UCLA, brought in a ton of talent through the transfer portal, but also like I think a little bit of an underrated, just in terms of developing talent, the talent that was already there. I think the DMR from this indoor season was a
Yep.
great example of that. Obviously, Mia Barnett came in and was that last piece, but the rest of that lineup was very good. Ran very well, and you could see a very bright future ahead for UCLA, which makes this quite the surprise. Um, Obviously, there could be complicating factors, but just looking at it from like the purely on the track, on the grass perspective, things seem to be going extraordinarily well.
Yeah, it was odd. So text comes across my phone. Hey, have you seen this? Brosnan is maybe out at UCLA, which for a guy who is basically just 1 year in, that's extremely surprising. Extremely. Um, and sure enough, he gets on Instagram Live and says, "Here are to put all the rumors to bed. Yes." My contract has not been renewed. Most assistant contracts, he says, are on a 1 year basis. His was not renewed because, quote unquote, I don't know if this was the program or the school or whoever, but whatever the overseeing body was, is that they, quote unquote, did not like the way he led the team, which is very odd. um, like you said, I don't understand how you have the success that he has had recruiting, the instant impact, the clear improvements throughout the entirety of the year. He's only been there for a year, and then for them to say, "Well, we don't like how you led the team." It's like, okay, so we're in agreement though, Ben, that it feels like we're missing something, correct?
Yes, this isn't a performance based driven decision. It would seem. It would seem that there is, whether it's like the way he handles himself and with the rest of the coaching staff or the athletic department, or if, as there's been speculation, any rules were broken. Obviously we have no idea, but it seems like there's only a few other possibilities for him not to be renewed. And because the performances on the track were certainly good enough, and you would never expect for someone to do who had the performances that he did in his only year there to be let go. So that obviously allows your mind to wander to other directions. And there's a bunch of things that it could be. Um, but I can only really think of a few.
So there's a few aspects. I'm going to ramble a little bit here, but there's a few aspects to this. So the speculation is that, and it's not just from rumors online that on these message boards that Brosnan even referenced. I have spoken to coaches who believe that he was poaching athletes prior to entering the transfer portal. They had Mia Barnett, Sam McDonald, Delia Frias, all the way Virginia, Duke, and Alabama, respectively. They were all underclassmen, all within about a 3 month span, right? So on that side, you're like, well, that's pretty interesting, especially when Barnett enters the portal, one day and then that same day she's committed. And you're like, that's a little interesting, right? But it's very possible if you also look at the other side of this, where they're like, okay, all three of those women that I just spoke about, they're all from LA. They're all from the
Mhm.
Los Angeles area. Like, and they were all, it's not like they were juniors or seniors into their eligibility. They were just beginning to find out what the collegiate stage was like, and they were on the complete opposite side of the country. So it's very possible that they came to him and said, hey, we're interested. And he said, hey, great. I can't contact you until you're in the transfer portal. And then once they did, they made a quick deal and it worked out. And by that logic, it's legal. It's totally fine, totally legal. And Brosnan, to his credit, even came out and said, "Hey, I did not." He vehemently denies violating any NCAA violations, right? Which, so I'm still confused as to where the disconnect is. I struggle to believe it's like a conduct thing. The understanding that what he was putting out there was that it's a very political, and that it was a higher up decision, and that it was it seemed to be like a more political and coaching based decision. I don't know how that works and what that entails, but I'll tell you this: I've got a lot of contacts. I do. I have a lot of contacts in the NCAA. And while my core contacts, my main contacts, I feel like are great stand up people, they are great people across the board. There are other people who I've spoken to where I go, yeah, it's political. It's very political. And I don't doubt that there were coaches outside of, the UCLA program who were, maybe trying to, create negative connotations or whatever. It happens. It's very much a possibility. So, I think it's important for everyone's imagination not to run away here, but also naturally, I think, scratch your head and go, this is odd. And I think we're in agreement.
Yeah, I the whole political thing is I understand where you're coming at from like an outside coaching perspective, but I don't even know if that's the defense I feel like he should be leaning on, because this is a program that felt good enough about him to hire him less than a year ago. And I don't know, something must have happened in that scenario for them to have soured on him pretty quickly. And
Yeah.
whatever that is, obviously NCAA rule violations not great, but like you're not
Which,
breaking
to
the
be fair,
law.
is not been proven. That's only
No,
just
absolutely not.
a
I'm not saying
rumor,
that. I'm
just to
not saying.
clarify.
I'm just saying in general, if you did break an NCAA violation, you're not breaking the law. Like you're not like in the grand like moral scheme of things. That's like I don't. We
Yeah,
might
it's
disagree
not
about
it's
this.
not a it's not a
It's the
legal US
worst thing.
precedent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not like
Yeah.
the worst thing in the world. Um, so it's like, yeah, maybe he did it. Maybe, and more likely, like you said, there's a very good chance he did not. But I just it seems like he's setting himself up by to for almost like worse allegations. And like I like you said, I don't want my anybody's imaginations to run wild, but it's just like what else is there? Like, and that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I'll admit the vagueness and everything else around this. It's not a great look. It's just not. Um, but um, there's also a lot of people who will say this. They think they know what's going on and they don't. And people's imaginations do run wild and they take it as fact. And like, it's easy for this to happen. And he's done nothing wrong. He's done that we know of right now. He's done nothing wrong. There's no evidence of that, at least that I know of. And he built up a great team. So for them to say, we didn't like the way you led is odd. It's surprising. I scratch my head about it. I wonder if there's something that we're missing. And I think that's unfortunately, at the moment, the only thing that we can really grasp right now.
Yeah, agreed. And I want to highlight a point you made earlier about the transfer portal, and obviously some of those women um, signed fairly quickly. But that's kind of the world we live in right now, like where there's a very gray back channeling ecosystem for the transfer portal in all sports. Like it's not athletes aren't waiting to go on the transfer portal to start assessing their options anymore. Like that's just because then they're able to do that. Coaches can't reach out, but athletes can start
Yep.
to figure that out, and so they can start to assess their options, and then once they feel good, they can get on the portal and go. And so Mia Barnett's situation, while it seemed like it wrapped up quick, I would be stunned if there wasn't examples of other athletes in other programs that happened along the same line. So, um, all that to say, that's not the smoking gun. I think some
No.
people necessarily think it is.
And I agree. It's not. I can tell you, I've talked to other coaches before where they've reached out to athletes and they're like, "Oh no, I'm good." And like, you haven't even been on here for 3 days. How are you already good? Like, some of them just know, and some of them know,
Yeah,
like, hey, as soon as like I'm on here, I'm going to reach out to that coach, and if that coach has money for them,
yeah,
chances are it's going to work out pretty quickly. Um, I do want to bring up one more caveat of this, and that's the fact that it seems fair to say that Barnett and McDonald and Frias all went there for Brosnan. They were
yep,
recruited by Brosnan. It's a very fair assumption. That and they wanted to be closer to home and things of that nature, and like back West Coast, start a young developing team, so on and so forth. But because Brosnan isn't a head coach or a director, they can't transfer to any other school without sitting out for a year. So, and I double checked this with a couple coaches, three of them actually. I was like, hey, just so I understand this correctly, they can't go anywhere.
interesting.
And like I heard one coach
Unless
like, well,
unless UCLA lets them, like they can
I
they
know I don't know if that's true. I think it's an
I think they
NCAA
can
rule,
waive it. I thought it was the program that they're leaving could waive it.
and I don't know that specifically. And I want to say you're right, but I don't want to definitively
You're
say
right.
that until I
Yeah.
have clarification. Um, but that's interesting now because
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, maybe they could appeal. They're like, even if that's extremely hard, it's
Yeah.
unlikely. So really interesting to see what happens there. It's a tough situation for them. It's a tough situation overall, and it's not what I thought we would be talking about on Tuesday, August 1st. It was not.
No, yeah. I mean, it's just a fascinating situation for the team in general. Like, this is a team that we had high hopes for because, like we mentioned, with all those women, those are not like women with little eligibility. They have a lot of eligibility. They had a long runway to he had a long runway to build something this year and in the years to go with these transfers, and then add recruiting classes, add more men and women through the transfer portal. It really well set up to because of the youth of those transfers to be able to really build something really nice. And now they still have those bones, but he's not going to be around to build it. And like you said, you wonder it the level of confidence those athletes have in the program moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, it's a weird situation, but we'll see what happens. And so, thank you to everyone for listening to onto that rant because we were trying to. I want to be very delicate about something that's but a lot of rumors that have just been flying around and a lot of unknown right now. So, but you make good points. I think we're 15 minutes in. I think we can move on to the next coaching change. I'll transition us. Helen Lehman-Winters, she's back in the NCAA, heading to Illinois after Sarah Haveman left there to go to the women's distance program at Texas.
Mhm.
Helen Lehman-Winters previously worked at University of San Francisco for, I believe, 15 years, 2003 to 2018. Had massive success, brought in
Yep.
numerous overseas stars. Was phenomenal, actually, with a handful of those women. They were top names. Charlotte Taylor, I believe, won the 2017 10K national title. I think I got those specifics correct. Yeah, San Francisco also got second, runner-up, 15 points behind New Mexico at the 2017 NCAA cross country championships. And then in 2018, Lehman-Winters leaves San Francisco for Oregon. After the Pals leave, for 2018, Oregon does well. They get third at NCAA's. But then after that, there's been some turnover with the roster between transfers and expired eligibility and maybe an injury and some limited recruiting. And then COVID happens. Jessica Hall wins a national title. Carmela Cardama-Baez wins a national title. But ultimately, by 2022, Jerry Schumacher comes in, brings in Shalane Flanagan. Ben Thomas and Helen Lehman-Winters are no longer the distance coach at Oregon, and now we're here. So, Ben, when you hear that Illinois is hiring Lehman-Winters, A, scale of 1 to 10, how surprised are you? And then B, scale of 1 to 10, what do you think that fit is? Like, how do you like that pairing? Like
I
10
think
being
at
great and 1 being nah.
right. When I initially heard it, I felt like I was more like a 7 or 8, but the more I thought about it, I was like, this really isn't that big of a surprise. So I
Mhm.
would say like a 4 or 5 because
Yep.
it in a lot of way. And to answer your second question, I think this is like an 8 or 9 in terms of fit because at first blush it seems like an odd pairing because of the prestige that I think Lehman Winters enters with from all those years at San Francisco where she did so well. And then even if she didn't have quite match that success at Oregon, it's you're still the coach at Oregon. Like that
Sure.
holds some weight. And Illinois is never going to be like put in the same conversation as an Oregon in terms of their past accolades in cross country, but it's a good program, Big Ten program. So I think it's a good landing spot for Lehman Winters, who has been out of the NCAA, hadn't been able to kind of work her way back in. And for Illinois, like we said with Haveman to Texas, I think this is about as good as you're gonna do. Like I think it like in terms of the coaches that were on the market and that would be willing to head there, I think it's a pretty home run hire for them to get someone with her resume, what she's done in the past. There really isn't anybody out there that I think they could have gotten that has that kind of CV to their name.
And I think that's all fair. Everything you said was well put. I struggle. I think this is a little bit of like a weird dynamic. For me, I agree. The surprise factor is like 4 or 5. It's surprising because, well, it's not surprising in the sense that like who else, like you said, who else was really going to be like the best option there? And from a like option standpoint, the best hires you could get, Lehman Winters was probably the ideal fit there. But where the level of surprise, the other half of the surprise comes in, is also related to her fit. I don't know if this is, and this is not to necessarily say that she won't do well, and this is not to necessarily say that she's a bad coach because she's certainly not. But I was like, I think it's like a 3 or 4 fit because when you think of like out of 10, that is. Lehman
Mhm.
Winters, she has historically had her coaching career based on the West Coast, UCLA before San Francisco, before Oregon, almost entirely there. And she has been heavily introduced, she has heavily introduced international recruits to the NCAA. I mean, San Francisco, I want to say, I don't know this for sure, that she brought in Claudia Kazmierska to Oregon initially, or at least she was going to have her come in before, the whole regime at Oregon changed. And when I kind of think about this, is like, okay, Illinois is in the Midwest and it's very different from the West Coast. And I'm interested to see how you bring in international names from Europe to Illinois. It's interesting there, and that's why I'm like, I'm not quite sure how to balance that.
My response to that is Bradley did a great job of bringing over British talent.
Fair, fair.
Illinois is a much better spot than Bradley in terms of, I think, geography and just in terms of level of competition, resources. I think they're going to be able to attract those kind of athletes and better to Illinois. And I think there is already that pipeline of, at least from the British side of things, to the Midwest that I think she'll be able to continue to develop. Whether that expands to the rest of Europe or the rest of the world, I think that might be a harder sell to come to Champaign rather than San Francisco. Um, but it's still, I think it's possible, and the reason I like the fit is, and maybe the one reason I don't like the fit, sorry, is I if I'm Illinois, I'm a little concerned that this could be a stepping stone job.
Mm.
She's been out of the NCAA for a little while. I wonder if she had her sights a little higher initially. Obviously, Haveman left for greener pastures. I wonder if that's a possibility down the road. Obviously, she'll have to succeed well, succeed and have the team run well. And if that happens, I'm sure Illinois will be happy. But I do wonder if there's a sense that this might not be the final resting spot for her.
Yeah, and that's a great, great point. I would think, Haveman's went from being the distance coach at Illinois to the women's distance coach at Texas. That probably came with a pay raise, but
Hmm.
like the role itself is not any different.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I could absolutely see this being a stepping stone job. And you're right, you make a great point. The Bradley hires. I guess like my only other dichotomy, I have like two different dichotomies with the Lehman-Winters. It's that on one hand, like I think she was phenomenal at San Francisco. Like I think what
Hmm.
she did at San Francisco probably made her the best coach in the NCAA when they were at the height of their
Right.
powers. I actually do believe that. I think 2017 specifically. They sincerely were incredible. She's maybe the best coach in the country. But her time at Oregon was not good. Couldn't retain the talent. Recruiting was not great, and the recruits that they did bring in didn't help on the grass. I want to say they didn't even field a team at like the COVID year Pac-12 championships. I might be mistaking that, and I don't want to, but I just didn't think it was that great. And this again, the other side of that though is that like she was in such a brutal spot. All those athletes wanted to go join pals at
Yep.
Washington. They were already expired eligibility. She had to come and instantly try to rally together a group of recruits. The ones who did come over from San Francisco didn't have the best transition, and then she got hit with COVID. Like
Yeah.
it's the worst, the one of the worst possible situations just to like walk into and then try to have instant success. Unfortunately, that's just the status that comes with having the Oregon distance job. And so that's why I'm not ready to be like, this is a bad hire. It's not a bad hire. She's, like you said, probably the best candidate. I'm surprised about maybe the fit, but she's now going to have a young, solid Illinois core to work with. They've proven that they can get to the national stage multiple times, and now we'll see what happens. I think if Haveman is able to do this and get this team to a national level, I would say in 2 3 years, Lehman Winters can do the same.
Yeah. I agree. And it reminds me, you see this a lot in college football where you have this small school, like I think Urban Meyer is probably the best example of
Yep.
where he made the transition from like a Utah to a Florida and flourished. But there's a lot of examples where that small school football coach that brings their team along and exceeds expectations,
PJ
and
Fluck.
yeah, and then but then they move on to the big job and they don't do great. And whether it's because of the size of the program, the size of expectations, and that it just wasn't a great fit in terms of coach college relationship. And you wonder if that was almost with Lehman Winters, where San Francisco, she was had a free ride to do everything because she had so much more success probably than anyone ever imagined that they could. Whereas Oregon, the expectation is to have that success and more
Yeah,
every single year.
that's fair.
So I think going to obviously another Power Five program, but one with significantly less expectations, I think could end up being the right culture fit for her.
Yeah, yeah, and again, I don't think we're saying that like she, I don't think we're saying that like, oh man, she just dismantled. That's not what we're saying.
No.
It was just wasn't her best 4 years
Yeah.
compared to her time at San Francisco. She'll probably do great, and I don't think that she's necessarily not capable of like a job at Oregon. That would be ridiculous. She clearly is. But in terms of like the stepping stone, in terms of like how that whole regime changed, this seems like a nice landing spot. That whole football like analogy you made, I couldn't stop but think. I was like, oh, this is Justin Fuente. This is when he went from Memphis to Virginia Tech football head
Yeah.
coach, and then we went downhill. Anyways, he's not there anymore. Not important. So Lehman-Winters, yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. Excited to see what happens there. Um, we don't know if this, I don't know if this is gonna be like the longest podcast ever, but let's wrap up on something that we could talk about for a bit.
Yeah.
Happened last year. Big Ten snagged USC and UCLA, who will leave the Pac-12 in 2024, and now Colorado. University of Colorado is leaving for the Big 12 in 2024. Big 12 has already added, I believe, BYU, Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. I want to say for this year, 2024. I'm not. I forget specifically. I want to say this year actually. And then in 2024 they'll lose Texas and they will lose Oklahoma. But 2024 they'll have Colorado come in. Thoughts?
It's really interesting to read about this because it seems like the TV deal for Pac 12 is the driving force, the uncertainty there, whereas these other conferences have kind of got theirs done and dusted and they can offer a fixed income to the Pac 12 programs that in regards to the TV money that the Pac 12 can't right now because they just don't have anything signed. For Colorado, it makes a world of sense to go to rejoin the Big 12. This is where they were originally. Um, they're kind of sitting right in between the two conferences geographically, so either one makes a lot of sense. And obviously, this is done with football and basketball in mind, not necessarily cross country and track. But from a cross country perspective, and I can't remember who brought this up in our Slack, but the Big 12 is going to be a terror to run
Yeah.
in with Colorado, BYU joining. You already have the Iowa State and Oklahoma State in there. Losing Texas hurts a little bit, but it is going to be quite the conference championship.
West
Um,
Virginia's pretty decent on the women's
yeah,
side.
absolutely. And so, yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. And really, and I think this the bigger talking point is obviously Colorado moving is significant in and of itself. But what does this mean for the
Yeah.
rest of the Pac 12? And is there going to be a Pac 12 as we know it within the next few years? Because the other big programs like Oregon or Washington are going to start looking around, I think, a little bit more if someone like Colorado, it's a good program across athletic program across the board, but it's not those programs. It's not a USC. It's not a UCLA. Like we're not talking about one of the biggest schools in the conference leaving. We're talking about a mid-size school in the conference leaving. So if a mid-size school is leaving, what does that mean for the bigger ones who think could attract better offers at better conferences? And so is this the first step to another big realignment? I think that's the thing that has to be on everyone's mind moving forward.
Um, I'm convinced someone else is going to leave and the Pac-12 will crumble. I do. I think
Who
at
do you
this
think the
point,
linchpin's going to be?
Oregon for sure.
Yeah.
It's absolutely Oregon. If Oregon leaves, everything's gone. You don't have a reason to like go
Right.
anywhere. I think it's Oregon goes to to Big Ten. I think you could see Arizona going to Big 12. This is just some of the rumors that I've heard, but it also makes sense
Yeah.
a little bit when you look at it from that perspective. I feel like we're gonna see one more team this week or next week. Like I feel like we could publish this podcast, and by tomorrow, or it's Tuesday, August 1st, and by Wednesday, there could be another rumor going around, and then it's finalized. The fact that the Pac-12 doesn't have a TV deal is insane. It's insane. You had Oregon, UCLA, USC at one point. Throw in Stanford for whatever that's worth. Or maybe like Arizona basketball and Colorado had Dion, right? Like it's
Yep.
right there. How do you not have a TV deal? How did the Big 12 already have a TV deal? Like
The
it's
Big
it's
12
crazy.
should have been an extinct, like,
It's crazy.
after Oklahoma and Texas, like, were announced they were gonna leave.
I don't
Like,
know about extinct, but I know what you mean. Like it's not the same thing. For Colorado to say, or for I think the quote that Brett McMurphy, who broke all of this, for him to say, yeah, Colorado wanted to leave the Pac-12 for the Big 12 because the Big 12 had more quote unquote stability and there was more uncertainty with the Pac-12. I was like, does anyone understand what those quotes mean? That's a significant quote to say that the Big 12, now it is because they added all those teams now, was more stable. And it's a lot of it's just monetary. It's the TV deals, like
yeah.
you mentioned, and that's what it really is. But the fact that the Pac-12 hasn't gotten that is crazy in my mind.
And the Big 12 is adding teams, and they're solid teams, but they're not adding like
No,
other old Power Five schools. Like, and that's the thing. Like, they were just trying to pick up the best from the rest and try to scrap together enough teams to stay relevant. And I mean, I think they picked good teams. Like, I think the BYU edition across all sports is going to be very
yep,
solid. But like, extinct is a harsh word, but they were on the verge of crumbling. And like you said, I think it is significant that Big 12 is seen as the more stable, the more likely to prosper conference moving forward than the Pac 12, because that was certainly not the case a year or so ago. And one other point I wanted to mention along the TV deal, um, the Pac 12 commissioner has said the longer they wait, the better the offers are getting. Like, they're driving up the price from TV execs by waiting this out. And while that may be true, I think we could debate whether or not that is true. But let's
I don't
just,
know if
for the
that's
sake
true.
of argument, say that it is.
We're saying for Pac-12.
Yeah, for Pac-12.
Yeah,
Let's just in this hypothetical world where what he's saying is true. Even if that is true, that's still not a good enough reason to not sign it, because you're going to lose your entire conference if you keep waiting. Like,
yeah.
like, even if you think you're going to get 10 more
Was
million
that a
dollars.
quote? Was that a quote that you just pulled?
Yeah, yeah, the commissioner said, like, the offers are getting, are they, the longer they wait, the better the offers they have been seeing,
I still
because
don't agree with
they're
that.
the last conference available. And so, like, I understand that a little bit from that aspect of, like, the other TV stations that don't have maybe college football or want to have more, they're going to be more aggressive. But the longer they wait, like, the more opportunity it is for other teams and other schools to leave. And like, sure, you might squeeze $10 million more annually out of this, but that's not going to be worth it if you don't have a league like by the time you get that.
That doesn't make sense to me. That's like saying, God, I don't even know. That's like I don't even know. Like I don't even know like what the logic behind that is. It's like if it's like, well, we're just gonna wait it out. It's really valuable. It's like, but there's nothing left. That's like if I was like gonna sell TSR, but like for every day that I waited, we lose an article and we lose the published article. It's like, well, here by a year from now, like here's all the here's the site, and then someone goes, well, wait, but where's all the where's all the exciting stuff? Where's the content? Like it doesn't make sense. So I, yeah, I struggle to believe that. I think someone else is going to leave. I think it's Oregon. I think Oregon has to be looking at this and being like, really? Like, we're powered by Nike. We have Phil Knight as our backing. And then we had to dance around with like Washington, which is actually a good program, good athletic
Yeah.
program overall. It's another good one. And Arizona, and Stanford, and Cal. That doesn't really excite me all that much. Utah, a good football program. So I don't know. That's odd. But from a cross country perspective, I mean, you want to talk about juggernauts. I mean, Iowa State, Colorado, BYU, and Oklahoma State have all been on the podium, either their men's or women's teams, in the past, I think,
Or
since, I
both.
mean, yeah, or both in a lot of cases. I think all of them except Iowa State have been on the podium, each time since the past 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And so here's now a question: who has the best cross country conference? between men's and women's, is it ACC? I don't think we're going to put the Big Ten in there yet.
No,
Is it ACC? Is it Big 12 or is it Pac 12?
I think it's
Cross
Big
country.
12 now. I mean,
I think it's close with. I think it depends. Do you value
ACC
top
has more
end?
depth.
They have more. ACC has more depth. ACC has more depth. Um, but I think if you want to make the argument, like, well, if depth only goes to 3 or 4 teams deep, maybe 5 if you're West Virginia on the women's side, like how much better is how much deeper is the ACC really in that case? Um,
They're a better version of what the Pac-12 has been over the last few years. Like the Pac-12 has
yeah,
has
yeah,
had
fair.
like that really top heavy, like, but with not a whole lot of depth. But now this is like even top heavier and with like an extra team thrown in there too.
Yeah,
Like I just think that's like BYU joining. It's like if NAU joined any conference, like
yeah.
it would just be like, oh well, they might be the best conference now. Like to have a program where on both sides, men and women, are perennially podium threats or even title threats, like that is a huge, huge get.
So, question: does the Pac-12 go after new teams now? They'd have to, right?
From what
They,
I've been hearing, there's a little hesitancy there, which I don't understand.
why would you not?
I I
Like, maybe
yeah
because you don't
I
want to split. Maybe because you don't want to split revenue on a TV
right,
deal.
exactly.
But I
That's
mean,
that's the reason I'm hearing. But yeah, it's interesting because the Big 12 or the Big 10, excuse me, hasn't. It sounds like they don't have a huge appetite to
sounds like that's
add
it.
more. But if you can get like let's just say you get Oregon,
I
Washington.
think if they can get Oregon, they're going to take it.
Yeah, if you can get Oregon and Washington, bring it up to what 16. You have a nice. You could have a 4 school division at that point, yeah, out west.
Yep.
You grow your TV market to the Northwest. You get that Oregon Nike connection, like you mentioned, and you just destroy essentially a Power Five conference and make it a Power Four. And really, at this point, we're talking like a Power Two and a half. Like
Yeah.
I think it's worth it, and we'll see if they pull the trigger on that. And I think there's
Well,
probably a lot of
who are the
conversations with
two and who's the half?
CBS, but oh well, two is Big Ten and SEC, and I think ACC is the half at this point, and Big 12's getting there, but
Okay. Yeah. And I would probably agree. I just want to make sure that we're on the
yeah.
same page. I'm an ACC guy. I have to defend what
Well,
little
the
top end.
ACC has to be looking around a little
Yeah, I know.
nervously too at
I'm
this
nervous
point
too. I'm nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna go back to the Big East. Like this is so bad.
because if Clemson and Florida State start
And I
getting
think they are. I would be
turned
surprised if they're not looking.
and Notre Dame maybe decides to do the same thing they're doing with somebody else,
Well,
or
they have
just
an independent for football, I think.
well, right, yeah, where they're like, that's what I'm saying. They're like halfway in,
Yeah,
essentially. They're not fully in. If they decide to go fully in with somebody too, then that's just you're in the same boat as a Pac-12.
I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried because Virginia Tech's just not one of those teams that's going to be like, oh, we want Virginia, we want the
Yeah.
Southern Virginia market. Like that's what we want. It's like, oh, great, awesome. Um, so yeah, I'm with you there. Anything further on this?
No, I mean it's really interesting.
Yeah,
I think it's probably bad for this like collegiate sports
yeah,
in
it's not great.
general, for this consolidation. Like because again, we're headed towards there being like the Big Ten and the SEC. Like that's let's just be frank. Like
Yeah,
this is where it's all headed of having like 2 mega conferences, um, which just practically for sports like the one we cover doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
not great. Not great. But I mean, luckily from a cross country standpoint, if everything stays as is, this is still like we still have 5 competitive conferences.
Yes.
Um, the problem is I don't think it's going to stay how it
Yeah.
is, and that's the problem. So um, that's all I have on that. Do you have anything more?
No, we got more out of those 3 headlines than I thought we would.
Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting stuff, and the realignment stuff is something we're going to be talking about, like you mentioned, probably in the near future, certainly in the next few years. Um, And who knows, maybe that'll change how we do regionals and other things because conference championships will maybe change the way we see things. I don't know. There's certainly a lot of change happening, and that could bleed over into a lot of different things.
Completely agree. And that's why I'm worried that like we're going to publish this podcast and they're like Oregon, Washington, and Arizona have left the Pac-12 for the ACC, which is my dream, but that's not the point. So, all right,
That
I
would
will.
make such the like geographically, like the Atlantic Coast Conference signs the teams as far away as possible. Like Florida
I mean, the
State.
Big Ten is going to have
Yeah, well,
Rutgers and
right.
UCLA playing each
Yeah.
other. Like,
Yeah, yeah. But like Florida State and Oregon being in the same conference would be pretty hilarious.
yeah, I keep forgetting Oregon State. That's right. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it there. Ben, nice job. Everyone, go leave rating and review on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify. Please, please, please. I know you don't think it helps. It does. And on YouTube as well. We got a lot of really cool stuff. It's coming. We're on the works. And that's all I got. Yeah.
Sounds good. Shout out to Finn for last episode. You guys did a
Yeah.
great job. He filled in very, very admirably. So really enjoyed listening to that. But until next time, Garrett, I'll talk to you.
I'll talk to you.